The Coach's Room. I'm Petey, and thanks for joining me. And let's continue where we started off with last week. We're going to talk a little playoff hockey, especially now that the trade deadline is over. We've seen all the changes in positions and players from around the league, but I just want to go back to kind of the numbers thing that we talked about last week. We talked about goals differential and how important that was to your team making the playoffs. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about your team's chance of making the playoffs based on our good friends' predictions at Stathletes. And going to look at some of the numbers and where the predictions are on where some of these teams sit. And then we're going to look at strength of schedule and how hard some of these teams have it in the upcoming weeks. And there's not many games left. When we're talking about under 20 games left in the NHL season, playoffs are upon us, and road games versus home games, games against playoff teams matter. So we're going to talk a little bit more about strength of schedule. I do want to talk about the Atlantic Division too, because we talked about all of the, the additions and trades going on. And you had Seth Jones in Florida. You make changes in Tampa. Toronto Maple Leafs are still looking for some success. But I think it's incredibly important for the Atlantic Division teams to win the division. And does the absence of Aaron Ekblad and Matthew Tkachuk hurt the Florida Panthers' chances of making it over the hump and winning the Atlantic Division? Because I do think that's important. I do think you don't want to face Tampa or Toronto in the first round. I think you want to have something different. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Aaron Ekblad and how that affects what's going on in the Atlantic Division. And lastly, we're going to talk about a general manager I just want thoughts on. I want people to chime in, hit me up, DM me on Twitter or X, sorry, at S Peters Hockey, and give me your thoughts on this individual as we get to him. We'll get to that in just a minute. But let's start off in the Western Conference. And I want to start off where we talked about with last week with the Utah Hockey Club and how close they were to the standings and how close they were to making it into the playoffs. And I said a week ago, you looked at their plus minus. Last week, they were a -9, but that was pretty good for the teams outside the playoff picture. They were 5th in the wild card spots a week ago on the 4th, 63 points, 4 points out behind the Calgary Flames. And then they go off and have a moderately successful week. They get a win in Detroit. And then you get 2 overtime shootout wins. So you get some more points. You end up with points in three straight games, and you go, okay, that's not terrible. We got points in 3 straight. We got 4 out of a possible 6, so that's okay, right? But what's not? And you're still 3 points out. You didn't climb over any teams. You're still 5th, and that's why it's so hard to move up in these standings, because you're treading water. You get points in 3 straight games. You haven't lost a game in regulation in a week, and you get nowhere. And you're still sitting this many points out. That's why it is so critical that you win the games you're supposed to win. And you have to win games like when you play the Chicago Blackhawks. You need to get 2 points. And that's where I think it's you look with your team and how important it is with 18 games to go for Utah, how important it is that they put a string together. Because we talked about strength of schedule. And when you start looking at how difficult their schedule is in Utah, in the Western Conference right now, they have the fifth easiest schedule. Sorry, fifth easiest schedule in the Western Conference is the Utah Hockey Club behind St. Louis, Vegas, Edmonton, and Chicago. So St. Louis has the easy. I don't know if you noticed, but they're chasing St. Louis. So with St. Louis having an easier schedule, matter of fact, St. Louis has the easiest schedule left in the National Hockey League. They play 7 playoff teams, and they've got 9 games at home. When you go to Utah, they play 9 playoff teams, and they have 10 home games, but they're ranked to have the 5th best home schedule. So it's going to be really hard. It's going to be really hard for the Utah Hockey Club to make the playoffs. And you look at the teams that they're chasing, and again, that's where it becomes difficult, is because how many teams you're chasing. They're chasing St. Louis, they're chasing Vancouver, and then they're chasing Calgary. So you can see how difficult it becomes when you only have 18 games left. So Utah's going to have to go on a little bit of a string. They're going to have to win several games in a row. They're going to have to knock out 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4 down the stretch. It's doable. It can happen. Like I think when you start looking at the percentages and the likelihood of making the playoffs, Utah's still one of those teams that's in it. But they got to put a string together. And in the Western Conference right now, when you look at some of the teams and how much they stocked up at the trade deadline, and I know Utah is in a situation where they weren't ready to stock up. They stocked up by re-signing their own players, and I think that was a great strategy by Bill Armstrong. I think that he needed to go again. He's talking about the future. Bill Armstrong's not looking to win the Stanley Cup this year. He's not. So I think what they were trying to do is make their signings, get their players locked up for several years to come, and I think they're in a good spot for the future, not for this season. So one of the things I wanted to look at, and when we talk about percentages and trying to make the playoffs, when we used to wake up at this time of the year and go into the coach's room and grab our coffee and start talking, it was all about the standings, who played who, and we had these charts. And it literally has every team in the league. It's got who they're playing, when they're playing them. Is the team a playoff team? Are they not a playoff team? Is it a division team? Is it? And it's all laid out on this chart on who has to do what for us to get in. And the truth is, you don't know. Yeah, we're going to put up some predictions in a minute, and our friends at Stathletes put together some predictions for who's going to make the playoffs. But honestly, you don't know. You don't know what goaltender's going to get hot. You don't know if the Chicago Blackhawks are going to be a spoiler down the stretch. Have you seen what Spencer Knight's been doing there? Kid can play. He can kick down there in Chicago. So maybe they're a spoiler on the way out. Maybe they put a string together. There's no pressure. Chicago's got no pressure on winning these games where the teams they're playing need to win games. Chicago's going to be interesting to watch. And if they are going to, it's a lighter mood in the locker room. They got rid of some negative vibes at the trade deadline. They're all rallying around Spencer Knight. Can they put a string together and win a few hockey games? I think it's going to be interesting to see how they affect what's going on in the Western Conference. So let's take a look at what Stathletes has as the percentages to make the playoffs in the Western Conference. Now, I'm not a math guy. I don't know my probabilities, statistics. I don't know how they come up with these numbers, and it's not mine to question them. I'm just telling you, Stathletes has the following for the Western Conference teams' chances to make the playoffs. The top four: Colorado, Vegas, Winnipeg, and Dallas. 99.9%. But buddy, they're in. Like Colorado, Vegas, Winnipeg, Dallas in. Edmonton 99.6 in. LA Kings 97.2. Well, I'm not not a mathematician. That's pretty darn close to being into the playoffs. At 97.2, you've got a pretty confident that you're going to make the playoffs. But then you get to Minnesota at 91%. Again, 9 out of 10 chances the Minnesota Wild are making the playoffs. That's 7 teams. You have 7 teams in the Western Conference at 90% or better to make the playoffs. 9 out of 10 times they're making the playoffs. That means there's one spot left. There are one spot right now left in the Western Conference with under 20 games to go. And those 4 teams are Calgary Flames, St. Louis Blues, the Utah Hockey Club, and the Vancouver Canucks. And when you weigh in strength of schedule, home and road, who they have to play and how they are playing currently, the Calgary Flames have the best chance to make the playoffs right now. 35.9%. 35.9% is not a lot. And I remember getting up in the morning and at the Arizona Coyotes, and you're looking at, we got a 0.2% chance, but you're out. We were out by November. Like, we weren't looking at the playoff standings. It didn't matter. Like, really? You get a 0.2% of every team falls off the face of the earth and loses every single game. And you win every one, you have a 0.2% chance. So the Calgary Flames have a 36%. Let's call it 36. 35.9% chance to make the playoffs. Next in line, and that's where the line ends. Like right now, if the playoffs, I know people hate this if the playoffs started today because they don't start today. But if they did start today, Calgary is in. The St. Louis Blues are the next team percentage-wise with the best chance to make the playoffs outside of the 8 teams that are in now. It's the St. Louis Blues at a 29.8% chance. So you look at their 29.8 versus Calgary's 35.9. That's a pretty close margin. That's a win here or a win there for the Calgary Flames and the St. Louis Blues. That's how close those two teams are. So when you look at what they have coming up, they don't play each other anymore. So that's the way you make up this ground. If St. Louis were to play Calgary, that would be a place you can make up 4 games. You can make this up in one night, but they don't. Just after the St. Louis Blues, the Utah Hockey Club coming in right now with under 20 games to go, 25.9% chance to make the playoffs, almost a 26% chance, 1 in 4 chance that Utah can make the Utah Hockey Club can get into the playoffs. Now that's a big deal. That's a big percentage for a team that came into this thinking, yeah, we're going to have a good season. We're going to be a little better than we were a year ago, but they're sitting at 26% chance to make the playoffs. They play St. Louis one more time. So that's a huge game. You still look, they've got Vancouver, they've got Edmonton. Those are games you got to win, but they got Chicago again. and they just took Chicago to an overtime and lost. You got to win those games that they're supposed to win. But for them, when you look at the schedule, their last game on April 16th is against the St. Louis Blues. On the 15th, sorry. This is the St. Louis Blues. That game could be the game that decides making the playoffs. Talk about pressure. That last game of the year for the Utah Hockey Club, buy tickets now, because that could be a huge game for those two teams. Again, that's a huge. We talk about the ability to play those teams above you, and you look at the Vancouver Canucks are next right now, today, according to Stathletes, the Vancouver Canucks have a 20.3% chance to make the playoffs. Now, I'm not so sure when you look at the Vancouver Canucks and what they accomplished a year ago, and they were just outside beating the Edmonton Oilers. They just missed it. They went to 7 games against the Oilers. The Oilers go on to play in the Stanley Cup final, and Vancouver's a team on the verge. And this is the team that's a rising star. Coach of the year, Rick Tocchet, and then they have locker room turmoil, and Pedersen and JT Miller can't get along, and everybody's struggling, and everybody's pouting, and everybody's mad. And now the Vancouver Canucks are sitting on the outside looking in. And you're a team right now that, if you look at the statistics, they might be the first wildcard team 1 point out right now, but due to some of the things that we talked about, like strength of schedule and home and road games and how they're playing currently, they're 5-5 in their last 10. St. Louis is 7-1-2. So Vancouver's on a little bit of a downside slide right now, which puts them outside the playoff picture. And what is that going to do with what's going on in Vancouver and what their fan base expects, what their management, what their ownership expects, what a head coach like Rick Tocchet demands from his players? I mean, there's going to be an unhappy crew up there in Vancouver if this is a team that falls outside the playoffs. And with 18 games to go, they're right on the cusp. But when you start looking at all of the variables that go into making the playoffs, this is a team that could find themselves out of the playoffs right now. And I think that's a big shakeup coming in Vancouver. I don't mean by firing, but they're going to have to change some players. They got to change the locker room structure. They're going to have to move some people in and out. I don't think they're making changes to management or the coaching staff at this point. I really don't, nor do I think they should. I think their issues are inside the room, and I think they're with players. So don't be surprised if something happens there. Well, we're talking about percentages. Let's go over to the Eastern Conference. And this is where I think it's important where we talk about what's going on with Florida and the Florida Panthers and with Aaron Ekblad. And Aaron Ekblad is suspended by the NHL performance-enhancing drugs, 20 games, 18 left in the season, first two playoff games he will be missing. And he said it was to help him recover from injuries, and he didn't check with his team personnel and medical staff first. First of all, players, because I know all kinds of players are listening to this show right now. Don't do that. You have an amazing staff. They have so many resources between medical personnel, medical trainers, doctors. The NHL takes incredibly great care of their players. Please use those guys. And I tell you what, it's a real deal. And before the season starts, they have the league brings in representatives talking about taking supplements and things that you don't think about, and things that you or I, regular Joes that are walking down the street, can go to the drugstore and pick up over-the-counter medicines that might not be on the list that the NHL says, okay, you can take that. So you got to be extremely careful in anything you ingest, anything you put in your body, whether it's a supplement, a vitamin, whatever that may be. Make sure you're going through your medical staff, please. So Aaron Ekblad will be out, but how important is that? Well, I think it's extremely important with Brad Marchand coming to this lineup. You want to go to the playoffs on a winning note. You want to be winning. You want to be successful. You want to go into the playoffs hot. I think it's important for a team to go into the playoffs having a winning streak. I think it's difficult to go into the playoffs and limp in backwards and then all of a sudden try to flip that switch and start winning games. I think it's hard. Can you do it? Absolutely. But you can just go last year, go to the Vegas Golden Knights. The Vegas Golden Knights that bring in Hurdle and you go, oh my goodness, look at this team. They've got what a great trade deadline. They brought in Hannafin, Eichel's back, and this is great. Stone's just getting healthy and everything's going to be great. But they didn't get a chance to play together. There was no chemistry. There was no line where you felt great together, and they didn't get an experience. And I tell you what, if there's 10 more games in the regular season for that group to play together, they might have won another cup, but they didn't. And they didn't play together, and they couldn't find the chemistry, and they started off slow in the playoffs, and they got bumped, and they're out in the first round. So, but Florida, with some players on the IR, Matthew Tkachuk's out, hopefully for the playoffs. Ekblad's now out. So now you got to find that mix and you got to find that chemistry. And it's going to have to be instant. You're going to have to flip the switch on the first day of playoffs and go, okay, let's go play. But you know what you don't want to do? You don't want to do that and play the Tampa Bay Lightning right now. They're 8-2 right now. Tampa Bay Lightning are one of the hottest teams in the National Hockey League right now. With what they did to help their bottom six in acquisitions, I think they made really smart moves. Vasilevsky, he's struggled the last few games out of the gate, but this team is playing extremely good hockey. You do not want to be the Florida Panthers playing the Tampa Bay Lightning in round one. You don't. You want to get that first seed. The first seed in the Atlantic is so important. You think Toronto wants to play Tampa right now? No. Toronto wants to win this division. Toronto wants to be on top of the division and try to have their chances with Ottawa, New York, Columbus. They want to play one of those teams. They do not want to play Tampa. And goodness gracious, what if Tampa gets hot and gets into first, and now you're looking at a Toronto, Florida first round matchup? You don't want to do that. Winning the Atlantic is incredibly important, probably more so than any other division, maybe the Central right now. The Central, man, that Dallas-Colorado matchup, if Winnipeg can hold it together, that Colorado-Dallas matchup is going to be absolutely electric in the first round in the Western Conference. But Atlantic is the same thing. You need to win the division. And how important is this suspension to Aaron Ekblad to affecting that outcome? I'm not sure yet. I think we're going to have to see if, Tampa's lost a couple here in the last week and gave up 5 against Boston, and you're going to have to make sure that they're shored up defensively. But that's a team that can score and they can move. So anyway, that is going to be interesting to follow that out in the division to see who can win that division. I think it's going to be incredibly. Let's go to the Eastern Conference and let's see what this looks like. According to Stathletes, the percentage chance to make the playoffs, let's go right like we did in the West, and let's go to the 99.9 percenters. Carolina, Florida, Washington, Tampa, Toronto, in. That's 5 teams off the bat. 99.9% you're in. So you got 5 teams in. The Ottawa Senators right now, 95.2%, 95.2% to make the playoffs based on their strength of schedule, their home and road games, and how they were playing right now, and their success against the teams that they've got upcoming in their schedule. The Ottawa Senators are at 95.2%, followed closely by the New Jersey Devils at 94%. And the 8th and final spot in the Stathletes projection on 3/11/2025, the Columbus Blue Jackets. And the Columbus Blue Jackets right now are holding the last wildcard spot with 70 points. Well, right now, Stathletes has them at 41.6% chance of making the playoffs. The Columbus Blue Jackets, with all they've gone through with Johnny Hockey this season, the way this team has bonded and come together throughout this season, some of the big games they're playing, some of the young players that are playing extremely well, they're getting healthy, they're getting stronger, the goaltending has been good. This Columbus Blue Jackets team is a good hockey team. I don't know if they're quite ready to make that next step where we're talking about the Stanley Cup champion Columbus Blue Jackets, but this Blue Jackets team is a playoff team, and they've been better. So who are they? The next tier of teams? The New York Rangers are just outside the double line, and they're 29.9% chance to make the playoffs, followed by the Islanders at 14.5. You're talking 14%, just over 1 out of every 10 times the Islanders are going to make the playoffs. Man, that's not good statistics. If I wake up in the morning and I see that statistic, I'm getting concerned, even though when you start looking at the standings and you go, well, gosh, the Islanders, they're 5 points out. Yeah, 5 points is a long time. But we've said this over and over again. It's not just the 5 points. For the Islanders to get into the playoffs, they have to climb over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. You got to climb over 5 teams. That's incredibly hard. So the New York Islanders are all but out. The Montreal Canadiens come next at 9.9, Detroit at 6.7, and the Boston Bruins coming in with a 5.7% chance to make the playoffs. Not very likely there in Boston. Sorry, you're going to have to hold out for another year for Sweeney's Boston Bruins to see if you can make it into the next round of the playoffs. This is tight. This is when every point matters. Every game matters. You cannot lose the games you're supposed to win. You cannot go facing one of those teams that's in the bottom 10 of the league, and you cannot lose those games. And when you start looking at those teams in the bottom 10, we talked about Chicago already, but San Jose is another one of those teams playing well. How about those Buffalo Sabres right now? The Buffalo Sabres are looking at nights like they were great last night. The Buffalo Sabres have some good hockey players. and they're going to win some games, and they're going to frustrate some teams. So it's those games that you need to win when you're playing Pittsburgh, when you're playing Buffalo, when you're playing Chicago, San Jose, Nashville. You got to win those games. You've got to win those games if your team is expected to make the playoffs. And that brings me into the last thing I wanted to talk about, and that was the Pittsburgh Penguins. And we talked about the teams that had done great things and with teams with high expectations. The Nashville Predators, clearly, they built this lineup that we were talking about, competing for a Western Conference title. You were talking about, oh my gosh, Stamkos and Marchessault. Look what this team has done. Brady Shea, this is going to be a good hockey team. They're 15 points out of the playoffs. 15. Their season's been a disaster. They're minus 42 and plus minus. It's a bad hockey team, and they're finishing towards the bottom. They're extremely disappointed after seeing how high they set the bar in the offseason. Now, I don't think the Pittsburgh Penguins looked at their roster and go, okay, we're in. Like, we're in the playoffs. We're fine. We're right where we want to be. I think they felt that they were a bubble team. I think that they went into this season thinking, okay, we compete. It's funny because a year ago we were talking about where the Washington Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins were just a season ago, and how similarly their paths were starting to cross. We talked about Crosby and Ovechkin. You got two older players, and they're trying to continue their career and make the playoffs. Washington finishes with 91 points a year ago. 91. The Pittsburgh Penguins a year ago finished with 88. 3-point difference a year ago. Ovechkin and Crosby, 3-point difference. And I remember that Washington gets in on the last day of the year on a tie with Detroit, and they win the tiebreaker and squeak into the playoffs. But what happens this year? Well, Washington gets younger. They pull in, Protas and McMichael are having unbelievable years as those young players, and they're helping drive the bus. Ovechkin again, and he's found his game again. Their goaltending is great. They got 92 points and looking to be on their way to a President's Trophy, at least a competition with the Winnipeg Jets. So you go a team that last year squeaks in on the last day. This year they're winning the East. They're 9 points ahead of the next closest team in the Eastern Conference, and that's the Florida Panthers. They're winning the Eastern Conference. What happened to Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh is 3 points out of the playoffs. They were 6-2-2 in their last 10 last year. Made a really big push at the end of the season to try to make the playoffs. Two teams out, finished fourth in the wild card, just behind Detroit, who tied with Washington, and they finished 3 points out. Well, where are they now? Well, they're 10 points out. They're second to last place. They're 4 points ahead of the Buffalo Sabres. They've got 2 regulation wins in their last 10. The team is struggling. And I don't know what direction they're headed. And I don't know where they go from here. And is Mike Sullivan a great coach? I absolutely is. Mike Sullivan's a great coach. He's a great communicator. He's a smart guy. He's an X's and O's guy. He's got great relationships with his players. He's done an outstanding job there in Pittsburgh. What's he supposed to do? The commitment there has been to the older players and with Malkin and Crosby, and that's the path they were taking. You've lost some really good players. You couldn't get rid of some players at the deadline this year that some people thought might go. And where are you going from here? Yeah, Carlson and Letang at the back end. Well, clearly that doesn't work. And you can go to some of my other content if you want me to talk about Erik Karlsson. Sorry, Erik Karlsson, I'm not a fan. I red line in the offensive zone, lights out. Red line the other way, come on, buddy. No. So where's the team go from here? The goaltending's been a disaster. They can't defend. They're old. So what do you do? Which brings me to my question. And I talked earlier about that. I wanted to have a question. I wanted to get some discourse. I want some people to talk to me about what they think here and where they think this is headed. And I want to talk about Kyle Dubas. And Kyle Dubas, I don't know. Never met him. I've been in a room with him. I might have been in a room with him. I don't know. But I don't know him. People I've talked to really like Kyle Dubas. He's easy to deal with, smart guy. Everybody gets along with him. Nice guy. And one of the things Rick Talk will get mad at me, but I like nice guys. I like guys I can get along with. Rick Talk said you don't need to like everybody and they don't need to be nice. They just need to be good. He's probably right. That's why he's a coach and I'm sitting doing this. So by all accounts, Kyle Dubas is a really good guy. But I just want to take a minute to look what he's doing, both in Toronto and in Pittsburgh. And I want to know sincerely, Where is the praise come from? Where does the "you're a hockey genius" come from? Where does it what are the measures of having success in the National Hockey League? Because in my book, the measured success as a manager is winning. It's winning. And it's not winning games 1 through 82, it's winning after game 82. That's where you measure the success of a manager because you know your whole goal is to win the Stanley Cup, and only one team can. I understand that. Only one team can win a Stanley Cup. Got it. So there's 31 managers that aren't bad managers. They just didn't win a cup. But you got to see that progress. You got to see things going in the right direction. And I go a lot back to Utah and Arizona because those are the people I know and those are the people I'm most familiar with. So you look at Bill Armstrong and you go, okay, he's not going to win the cup this year. Bill Armstrong not winning the cup. Sorry, Bill. I hate to say that to the Utah fans. The Utah Hockey Club's not winning the Stanley Cup this year. But has GM Bill Armstrong made positive strides in a rebuilding team that you can go, oh, yeah, I see what direction they're going? Well, answer is yes. Through the draft, through young players, through signings, through waiver acquisitions, you can look at this Utah team and go, okay, yeah, I get it. You can look what's coming up through the American League and in the KHL and go, yeah, I get it. I understand the direction. I go, yeah, it makes sense. Not winning a Stanley Cup, but I get the direction. You look at Pittsburgh, not winning a Stanley Cup, by the way. And I've there's a guy who works at the grocery store. Matthew's a big Pittsburgh Penguin fan. Big. Like, I'm telling you, he knows everything about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Every time I go to the store, Matthew's still holding out hope, man. And we're only 10 points back. Buddy, Matthew, you're out. Pittsburgh is out. Pittsburgh is not making the playoffs this year, period. But more importantly, what direction are they going? What direction is the Pittsburgh Penguins going with they're still got an aging, but they talked about trading Sidney Crosby at the trade deadline. Talk about trading Sidney Crosby. So I'm wondering right now where this Pittsburgh Penguin team falls. Where does this Pittsburgh Penguin team fall? They're still old. They still can't defend, and they still have good goaltending. So then I want to go, and I'm just going to go. I want to take a deeper dive into Kyle Dubas, and I want to see what Kyle Dubas's numbers actually look like. And when you talk about what the history he has with Toronto and what he has done around the NHL, and I think he has had some success in the American League. I do, and I think he is a good general manager because he's a nice guy. But you got to win. I think you got to win. And so that's when we start talking about Kyle Dubas. We're going to go to his numbers here. And of course, this is one of those things where if you're listening on audio, you need to see the graphic, but more importantly, you need to see what it's like to I'm stumbling here, and here's why. I produce my own shows. I was so used to having Leah Merrill by my side to write the scripts, and I had Sean DePaz and Shane Diefenbach producing the show. I don't have them anymore. So as I go to put up the graphic for Kyle Dubas, guess what? Not there. It's not there. I thought I put it in before the show. It's not there. So I had to go build it and pull it in. So now we're back on track on Inside the Coach's Room with Petey, and let's look at Kyle Dubas through history. His first year as a general manager in the Toronto Maple Leafs. By the way, that was 18-19. The Toronto Maple Leafs have absolutely every advantage when it comes to finances, facilities. There is no excuses in Toronto, none. If you want a player, go get him. You want a staff person, go get him. That's how Toronto operates. They get the best of the best when it comes to every position in the organization. And if they don't, they have the luxury to go get that person. Because I tell you what, people want to work in Toronto. People want to play in Toronto. Not always, Shen, but most players want to go to Toronto. It's where you want to go. So you've got the luxury of money. And money fixes a lot of problems. Tell that to GM Don Maloney of the Phoenix Coyotes back then. Money solves a lot of problems. Kyle Dubas, 18-19, 100-point season, third in the Atlantic, losing the first round. And again, we're talking about success. They lose to Boston in 7 games in 18-19. Well, let's go to 19-20 and see if they're starting to progress. Well, unfortunately for everyone, There was the COVID shortened season. So 1920 season, it's COVID. We got to go to the bubble. And at that time, 70-some games in. Toronto was in 8th. They had to play Columbus, who was in 9th. Columbus wins that. They take that to the limit. Columbus wins that in 5 games. So they lose in the qualifying round. And I can't say much about that. That was a tough season. That was a weird, awkward season. I mean, heck, the Arizona Coyotes got into the playoffs, and they were 12th going in. So you can't say much on this. Let's go to 2021. Well, now you're playing the North Division. This is where you play every team in Canada. Who wins that? Well, yeah, Toronto did. Toronto won the North Division of the NHL in 2021. They had 77 points, losing the first round to Montreal. 7 games. Push to the limit. Again. 3 seasons, 3 times push to the limit in every game for Kyle Dubas. 21-22 by 115 points. 115 points in 21-22, losing the first round to Tampa. Again, 7 games, push to the limit, you're out. 4 times, push the limit, 4 times. Well, 2020, so let's go to 22-23. 22-23, 111 points. Again, regular success for Kyle Dubas is there. Like, the history is there. First in the North. The only season they stumbled was 1920, but who knows, because there were still 15 games left to go in the season. So who really knows? The regular season, lights out. Like, lights out. They win around. They beat Tampa Bay 4-2. Didn't even have to go to the limit. They win that first. Kyle Dubas gets his first playoff win against the Tampa Bay Lightning. They lose to Florida 4-1 in the second round of 22-23. And he leaves and goes to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And how do they do last season in the Pittsburgh Penguins? We already talked about it. Finished with 88 points, 4th in the wild card spot, and they missed the playoffs. This year, right now, you're looking at where they are in the playoffs right now. They're projected to finish with 75 points. Projected. Let's project. It's going to take 93, 94 to make the playoffs. Pittsburgh's not making the playoffs again. Missed the playoffs again. So he missed the playoffs in consecutive years. And not just out. Last year, 88 points. This year, projected 75. Even a few things go right. He lost ground in Pittsburgh. But what I think is even more interesting in Pittsburgh is you look prior to that. And the season before Dubas gets there, they get 91 points. So Dubas gets there, it's 88. Now it's projected in the mid 70s. But before that, listen to this. Pittsburgh Penguins made the playoffs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years in a row, including 3 Stanley Cups. 16 consecutive years. Okay, except 2020, the qualifying round thing in the bubble. So take that out. So we'll say 15. 15 years, 3 cups, all in the playoffs. So my question, and it's just a question, if you're going backwards in Pittsburgh, and I don't know where they go next year, and I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't know the moves they're going to make, and I don't know what they're going to do with Sidney Crosby, and how you're going to make everybody happy, and if you get Crosby and Malkin, is that good enough and young enough and fast enough to compete in a very young and fast Eastern Conference? I don't know. Goaltending, they got so many holes to fill in Pittsburgh. Can they fill it in a year? Gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I've got the Pittsburgh Penguins in the playoffs in 25-26. So you look at what's happening there in Pittsburgh and you go, okay, well, they're not making playoffs again. Kyle Dubas is clearly it's going backwards. So what is he going to be judged on? What is the demarcation of what you judge Kyle Dubas on? Not just today, but in the future. What does Pittsburgh need to do? They need to. We sign a few guys. We get a really good draft pick, and if you get a good draft pick, by the way, been down that road in Arizona many times. Well, that's 3, 4, 5, 6 years. You can buy managers can buy themselves a heck of a lot of time if they have good drafts, or you supposedly in good drafts publicly. You can go a heck of a long way if you do that, because that takes so long to get through these rebuilds. So then, what are you judging Kyle Dubas by? And so you get through all of this. He's got 1 playoff win in his tenure at Toronto, where you have, again, unlimited resources. Any coach you want will go there. Any staff person you want, scout. You've got all the resources. And now he's in Pittsburgh, and you're going to say the same there. There's no shortage of funds, and what you want to do to accomplish. The team's won the cup 3 times. and you got Mike Sullivan, the Stanley Cup winning coach. So what do you need to do there? So I guess my question is, I want people to hit me up on X at S Peters Hockey. Hit me up Blue Sky at the same S Peters Hockey. Reach out to the comments here, wherever you're listening to your podcasts, or on YouTube, and just say, well, what are your thoughts on Dubas? What is the ceiling on Dubas? And will he be remembered as one of the great managers in the National Hockey League? Speaking of YouTube, please subscribe to Inside the Coaches Room YouTube channel. It does really help me out. Leave a like, leave a comment, and go check out one of the videos I just finished. If you've got someone in your life that wants to learn a little bit more about hockey, wants to be a better fan, wants to know what they're looking at, don't understand the sport because it's too darn fast, just put a video out. It's a Petey's Puck Talk Beginners Basic Edition, and I'm talking basic. Like, we're going to talk about the marks on the ice. We're going to talk about what is a goal, what isn't a goal. We're talking about the lines, the players, what's a center. We're going to go through everything. It takes about 20 minutes, and you will be able to watch the game of hockey so much better and so much more clearly. So just go over to Inside the Coaches Room on YouTube and check that out. Subscribe, and make sure you leave a thumbs up. And wherever you get your podcast, make sure you're subscribing to, and you like and leave a comment, because it really does help me out. I'm having a blast doing this. I appreciate everybody that's out there listening to Inside the Coaches Room, and I can't wait to see what direction these playoffs go. And I'll be breaking down Ovechkin's chase to the Gretzky record. Every time he scores a goal, I'll break that goal down and show you what went right, the play that makes the play. I'm also going to be here getting ready for the playoffs, showing you what teams have to look forward to in the playoffs, and their strengths and weaknesses going in. All that coming up Inside the Coaches Room. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'm Petey. This is Inside the Coaches Room, and we'll see you.